Here is a forest in Burkina Faso that every satellite image confirms should not be there. Scientists flew from France and Belgium to measure it. The United Nations documented it. Peer-reviewed journals published the measurements. 30 years before this forest existed, the ground beneath it was dead hardpan, so compacted that international development agencies had collectively written it off and told the farmers to abandon it. One farmer stayed. He dug holes in the dead ground with a pickaxe in 40-degree heat. And the desert retreated. This is pit farming, a technique at least 4,000 years old. The technique that kept food growing in the semi-arid Sahel when rainfall failed and soil was exhausted, and which one colonial report removed from living memory in a single administrative decision. The Sahel, northern Burkina Faso, the dry season of 1980. Yakuba Sawadogo is in his mid-30s. Born around 1946 in the village of Gorga, he has been farming the same land his father and grandfather farmed. Since 1968, the rainfall has been dropping. By 1974, it has fallen 30% below historical averages. The topsoil has crusted into hardpan, a concrete-like surface that rain cannot penetrate. When storms come, the water runs off before soaking in. Seeds cannot germinate. His neighbors watch from a distance with the specific expression people reserve for someone doing something they are certain will not work. Then, in the first weeks of the 1981 rainy season, something appears in Yakuba's field that nobody in Gorga has seen in years. Green, in the pits, small, precise circles of germination rising from the hardpan, while every field around him is still bare, cracked earth. His neighbors come closer. Nobody says anything. The evidence speaks before anyone finds words for it. Nobody asked the oldest farmers what they remembered, except Yakuba Sawadogo, who asked his grandfather. The Mossi people of Burkina Faso developed pits across at least 4 millennia because they understood something soil science would take decades to confirm. In degraded, semi-arid land, the limiting factor is not rainfall, it is infiltration. By 800 CE, Mossi agricultural communities across the central plateau of what is now Burkina Faso were using pits as the primary technique for farming degraded land during low rainfall seasons. Arab geographer al-Bakri documented flourishing agricultural systems in the Sahel in 1068 CE. Systems that persisted without irrigation or imported inputs across terrain that modern development agencies would later classify as unfarmable. By the 14th century, the technique had spread across the agricultural communities of Niger, Mali, and Senegal, adapted to local soil conditions but structurally identical. Ibn Battuta recorded productive farming communities across the Sahel interior in 1352 CE on land that received less than 400 millimeters of rainfall annually. The technique required no purchased inputs, no imported equipment, no institutional permission to practice. It worked because the hole itself was the technology, capturing rainfall at the scale of one plant, concentrating organic matter, and doing something modern agronomists would not measure for another 6 centuries. It attracted termites, and the termites did the rest. By the 1930s, French colonial administrators running the Société Indigène de Prévoyance, the compulsory agricultural cooperatives imposed across French West Africa, had visited villages across Upper Volta and evaluated local farming practices against European industrial standards. pits failed those evaluations on 3 specific grounds. They required no purchased inputs, they could not be mechanized with European equipment, and they did not increase farmer dependency on imported French agricultural products. In 1932, Colonial agricultural inspector Henry Labouré filed assessments across Upper Volta, classifying indigenous soil restoration techniques as inefficient and economically unviable. The Société Indigène de Prévoyance extension curricula stopped teaching them. The generation trained under the colonial system learned European methods. Their children learned European methods. The knowledge retreated to the oldest farmers in the most remote villages, the places the colonial administrative reach never fully penetrated. When the Sahel drought arrived in 1968, the modern replacement methods failed on the degraded land they were designed for. The institutional response was more aid, more modern inputs, more development programs. Between 1968 and 1974, an estimated 100,000 people died from famine across the Sahel. In some regions, 80% of cattle died. The technique that could have mitigated it was still being practiced quietly in the remote villages the SIP never reached. Nobody in the development agencies asked what the oldest farmers remembered. A zai pit creates a micro-catchment at the scale of one plant. The hole captures rainfall, the organic matter absorbs moisture and attracts termites. The termites dig tunnels through the hardpan beneath the pit, breaking up the compacted layer, creating channels for water and roots, aerating the soil from below. Seeds planted in the pit have moisture, loose soil, and nutrients in conditions that would kill them anywhere else on the same field. When ICRISAT, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, measured Yakuba's results in the late 1990s, the numbers were not marginal, they were categorical. Soil organic matter on his land, 3 to 4 times higher than surrounding fields. Water infiltration rates, 5 times better than untreated degraded soil. Species growing on his land, 60 different trees and shrubs where there had been bare hardpan 15 years earlier. Millet and sorghum yields, 2 to 3 times the regional average. External inputs, 0 synthetic fertilizer, 0 irrigation, 0 purchased materials. Here is what one properly managed zai pit system produces on 1 hectare of degraded land. Year 1. Germination in pits while surrounding soil remains bare. Partial harvest, enough to demonstrate the technique works. Year 2. Termite tunnels deepen. Water infiltration improves measurably. Yields increase. Year 3. Full harvest with surplus. Wells on the land begin holding water through the dry season when neighboring wells are empty. The material cost is 0 beyond labor, a pickaxe or hoe, 1 handful of manure, compost, or dried organic matter per pit, 10,000 pits per hectare dug by hand during the dry season. Communities across Burkina Faso and Niger that adopted the technique developed group digging systems, families working neighboring fields together, rotating labor the way the technique itself rotates benefit across an entire landscape. Add stone bunds along land contours to slow runoff, and zai pits capture nearly 100% of rainfall on treated land. In a region where every millimeter is a survival resource, that is the difference between a farm and a desert. Here is the question: the 4,000-year documented technique, the ICRISAT measurements, the 100,000 dead, and the 200,000 hectares restored have been building toward. When French colonial extension agents arrived in Upper Volta in the 1930s and found zai pits in active use across the region, why did they file reports calling the technique inefficient instead of documenting it, funding it, and scaling it? They were trained agronomists. They understood soil science. They evaluated a technique that had sustained food production across the Sahel for 4 millennia, and they declared it inadequate using standards designed for European soil conditions that had never been applied to Sahelian land. The farmers who had used it for generations were not consulted. The knowledge was not documented. The curricula removed it. And 40 years later, when the drought came and the modern replacements failed, 100,000 people died in a famine the technique still being practiced in remote villages could have mitigated. They could not reach everywhere. In the villages the colonial extension system never fully penetrated, too remote, too small, too peripheral to the administrative priorities of the SIP, elderly Mossi farmers maintained zai pit practice quietly through the colonial period and into independence, carried in memory, practiced on marginal land, never entirely surrendered. Yakuba learned it from his grandfather learned it from his. Today, Yakuba is in his late 70s. His 27 hectares of forest still stand in Gorga. He still teaches. He still digs. Anyone who comes to his land and wants to learn leaves with the knowledge and with seeds from the 60 native species he has spent decades protecting. He has never charged for either. In the 2000s, Niger changed its colonial-era tree ownership laws, giving farmers legal rights to trees growing on their own land. Within 10 years, Niger added 200 million trees through farmer-managed natural regeneration, the largest documented environmental recovery in African history, not from billion-dollar reforestation projects, from legal reform and holes in the ground. The Tiriella Senegalese Agricultural Knowledge Preservation Project, operating across Burkina Faso and Niger, documents and connects farmers practicing traditional Sahelian methods today, building the living network that connects what was almost lost to the people who need it now. If you are managing degraded or compacted land in any semi-arid climate, the specification is simple and freely available. Pits 20 to 40 centimeters in diameter, 10 to 15 centimeters deep, spaced 80 centimeters to 1 meter apart. 1 handful of organic matter per pit, dug before the rainy season. Do not disturb the termites. For documented technical guidance, the World Resources Institute's publications on farmer-managed farmer natural regeneration are available through their open access research library. Chris Rage's work covers adaptation across different soil types and rainfall patterns. For seed sourcing and community connection, the Tiriella Senegalese network connects living practitioners to documented methods across Burkina Faso and Niger. 1 farmer, 1 pickaxe, 1 handful of manure per hole, and the desert retreated. They buried this knowledge once. It survived anyway, in the hands of the people they never reached. This is the Forgotten Roots Report. What was buried is documented. What was nearly lost is still alive. Next, the seed the Green Revolution replaced across 3 continents, the yield numbers it produced before it disappeared, and the single valley in Ethiopia where it never stopped growing. Every file in this archive was buried for a reason. Every one of them still works. Subscribe so none of them reach you too late.